Okay, can you guys hear me all right? Cool. Thanks for coming out. Really appreciate you guys coming out to see this. Tricia Treacy, who is my collaborator, is unfortunately unable to be here. A family commitment has taken her away, and she apologizes she can't be here today. But she's here in spirit. So a little bit about Tricia and myself. On the left is one of my pieces, and on the right is one of hers. Myself, I'm a son of a teacher and an engineer, which really comes through in my work. I'm more of a tangible interaction designer than sort of like more about physical stuff than digital or on screen. And I'm most interested in relationships with technology that foster a significance that's beyond the function and use. So technology that's our relationships with tech that is more emotional or more poetic, and rather than purely sort of functional. On the left is something called the cursive machine, which I made, which is it's intended because in our Common Core education in the United States, K-12 education, you're no longer required to teach cursive handwriting. So this piece I created to teach us how to write proper cursive handwriting in the future. And on the right was a book that Tricia would have had to explain a little bit more. But Tricia's skills are in letterpress and book arts, and she operates in lots of different disciplines, different contexts, and she works mostly in collaborative projects. And both of us use technology as part of a creative process, which is why this is more about technology as generative tools rather than just for production. And we share a process that emphasizes the analog and digital reciprocity, spontaneity, and surprise. So this project is our first collaborative project, and it really sort of it led the way to more of the work that we're doing today and that we're involving in our workshops, called Lexicology. It's a collaborative artist book and performance. And we began this with the question of how could letterpress, which is something that she's deeply involved in and was also part of my education and process in learning typography, how could letterpress be part of something larger, be part of a project and not just a production mechanism? And how could we incorporate performance, which is a strange thing as a bedfellow for letterpress? So the book itself is a collection of these letterpress printed cards that are all excerpts from our children's books. And then the idea is that it's a chance operation narrative where you would shuffle them and then read them in whatever order they would come out. And then we performed this book. This is at the San Francisco Public Library, where with these headsets and microphones and belt clip push buttons that I built and programmed in order to record ourselves reading the book and then play it back. So you get the idea that we would each read, it would record, and then it would sort of resequence these things back. So that idea of incorporating letterpress into other types of media. And then this project was a collaboration with a colleague of mine at University of Delaware, Troy Richards, and this was at SGC in St. Louis at Wash U. And what we wanted to do here was we wanted to challenge ourselves to demonstrate a process that involved printmaking and real-time plate making with the CNC router. And those of you that probably all know, a CNC router is a computer numerically controlled router that allows you an XYZ control of a spinning router bit. And so the idea here was that we would take photographs of people at SGC. We would then vectorize them in Illustrator, cut them out of plywood, and then print them all in the same day. In order to do that, I built a CNC router from Instructables, which was portable, and we actually shipped it out to St. Louis and used it for this thing. So if you're ever interested in a CNC, I highly recommend build one yourself, because then you'll know how they work. And so this is what our router looked like. It was retrofitted. It's supposed to be with a Dremel, and I put a trim router on it and had to weld a larger Z-carriage. So these are the prints that resulted from that. They were these amalgamations of different vectorized portions of people's faces. And then from this, Tricia and I realized that what we really wanted to do was to make wood type with our router. Wood type for letterpress printing is something that's coveted by graphic designers because it is manufactured a little bit these days, but not in the mass quantities that it used to be. And it's now very expensive to make. And so what we really wanted, and we're also very much type nerds. We absolutely love typography, visual language systems, and things like that, and how type affects what you hear and therefore what you know. So we initiated this project to explore the sort of post-digital, the sort of what's next, what's now coming out, and cross-disciplinary processes, something that would involve our love of type, digital fabrication, experimental letterpress making, and international collaboration. So we started with creating wood type with the CNC, really not knowing anything about how to do this, and realizing that we enjoyed the side grains, also called long grain, sides of the wood rather than the end grain, which is traditional on letterpress wood type, because when it was printed, it allowed the wood grain to come through. So you can see here, this is a snapshot of the router, or the EPS Illustrator A, the router, into the wood and into the print. And so what we really enjoyed was that wood grain, because you were left with something that was more than the sum of its parts. It had that analog and digital sort of reciprocity. We worked with a typeface called Vista Sans, specifically because it was designed by a guy named Javier Dupree as what he calls a blend of black letter and humanist writing. Black letter is like that old sort of, you think about like Black Sabbath and like that old sort of black letter lettering with the sort of flair of the human hand. And so we were really interested in that wood grain coming through. We were interested in that, again, that relationship between materiality and the digital processes that might have created it, and how what is left is an artifact that is sort of a blending of the two. And we essentially created a whole new face for Vista Sans that we called Vista Sans wood type. You can see that it's kind of rounded because the router bit is round. And so rather than going in and cleaning out all those notches, we actually liked how it left it round, again, as an artifact of the process of its creation. So then once we arrived at a good working process for making our wood type, which we made out of ash and oak, we decided that we wanted to expand this. We could have printed with our own type, but we wanted to see what other people would do with it. Again, that chance operation, sort of that surprise. So we invited 20 different people and studios around the world, and we basically said, if we send you a bunch of new wood type and a bunch of paper, would you print an edition? And everybody said yes, which was pretty awesome. And so a lot of these people have actually moved, and some of you may know some of these people, but this is where they were at the time of the project. So what we did is we sent them all paper donated by Legion Paper of New York and 5 pieces of wood type. And we asked them to send back about 40 prints, an edition of about 40. And then what we would everybody would get a set of prints, like a traditional print exchange, and then we would have about 10 or 15 sets for exhibition and sale. So this was the deal. We said, okay, we were challenging them with this mantra, these rules, that you had to print with the type we provide, you had to use the paper, and deliver your prints by a certain date. And what they all didn't know is they all got the same word, which is the word touch. And so 5 pieces of wood type in either 30 or 42 line, which is like 5 or 7 inch type. And the word touch now is a lot more prevalent, but it really references that idea of the post-digital, of we're human, we like touching things. We also had a website blog where people could post their process, which was really great because it allowed a lot of reciprocity between the participants themselves. And then this was a short little documentary video about the whole thing, and I apologize for the audio quality.
You get a real sense, at least to your firecracker, that we're participating right now in something that's about to take off a lot more, that's about to be something a little bit bigger.
Basically, the 2 main things of this assignment, well, there's 3. 1 is the paper, 2 is the letters, and 3 is the deadline.
reason this particular project is important is it does bring together the sort of artistic nature of printmaking and sort of the more kind of rational, systems-oriented nature of design for me.
This project, when they contacted me, was an opportunity to kind of re-embrace wood type in a thoughtful manner. You know, I'm really glad we're at a point where we can use digital technology for traditional craft and vice versa.
The fact that we were all using Vista Sans as the typeface was kind of interesting to me. It's a very stark juxtaposition, I guess. So I think that was a good kind of way to merge these ideas of, you know, old technologies and new technologies in a way that made sense.
I think there's something that's really interesting that happens when you work with other artists and in kind of a visual dialogue. And this one was a little bit different because people were posting on the blog, and it was great to see how far people were taking it out of the actual directions that they were given.
There were some unique things to this type that weren't quite historical, and we could really tell. You know, the wood grain they picked was really open. It allowed for a lot of texture. Some of the counters were left round as I assume sort of tribute to the router. So there's been a lot of subtle things that have already about this project affected how we look at letterpress.
Investigations of meaning and form through wood type don't necessarily relegate the work to a 19th century pastiche of wood type wanted outlaw posters.
So these are the resultant prints real quick. Again, he's the one that cut the type into little pieces. So it was a series of 5. And we did a print. That's all the cutoffs from the wood type, all the little, because not every letter has the same height, but they all have different widths. And then we kickstarted a book to document the project, the prints and the participants process in their own words. And so this book is digitally printed, but it's hand sewn. It's also that sort of analog digital, how can you take advantage of the things that are best of those both worlds. And so every artist, every participant had 2 spreads, and the participants included people like Dave Shields, who is more of a letterpress researcher. Incorporated small letterpress shops. This is Firecracker in St. Louis. Other people from around the world. This is Dafi Kuhn from Switzerland. And then also artists that do incorporate digital fab into their own works, such as Inga, whose print includes laser cut at the bottom, which says, "It's something you feel." So then what we considered the success of the Vista project led us to want to see if we could utilize a similar method for a project, a similar type of sort of curatorial process that we're also involved in, but with different intentions. So in this case, we challenged hand letterers and calligraphers, people that draw letters and whatnot by hand, around the world to experiment with contemporary translations of the Phoenician glyph system. If anybody knows anything about the Phoenician alphabet, it's the base of what all of our phonographic written systems are, things like Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, etc. And so we assigned each person around the world a glyph, which is the name of like a character. You call them a glyph. And we asked them to respond. So we actually gave them a sound as much as we gave them the glyph. And we just asked them to respond to that sound, to retranslate that sound into some type of a hand-lettered artistic process. And so some of the things that these people wrote were the phonetic value of M, the sound at the stage, was linked to the image of a water line. The rhythmic form of a wave can still be found in the image of the letter M. The writing movement for the sound mem is so archaic that it has survived throughout the millennia. Like the sine curve of a heartbeat, the wave line visually corresponds to a rhythmic-based movement. So he provided this little time lapse and then his final print. Or not even a print, I guess, original artwork. So you can sort of see the A. It means, it means ox. The Aleph means ox. Sorry, mem meant water. So she writes, working with slingshots, spray bottles, toothbrushes, and brayers, she used the project to experiment with unexpected tools. She does a lot of drawing and incorporating drawing into other processes. She was visualizing patterns, and she was looking at the shape of the Phoenician A, or that initial glyph, in terms of its ubiquity as well as its sort of overuse. And her final drawing, Sharpie drawing, you can see she wanted to make the A as difficult to see as possible. It's in there. And then, which means house. So he extrapolated the sound through iteration of the glyph, and also he did a lot of additional sound recording just to try to understand that glyph. And then what he created was an addition of completely different and unique marks. This is actually one of about 30, and they're all different, all based on that, just the pure experimentation.
Yo, E,
which means hand. And so Yingmeng created an edition of 40 also unique prints with a theme that stemmed from the glyph. It's close to the modern E, and it inspired him to draw architectural sound paratives. E is a sound that's like filling material. It often functions as padding between consonants, like glue between bricks. Which means wall. And he worked in processing, which is a programming language, to create interactive typographic forms. The code generated different variations of the shape using different extractions and whatnot. And then his final one, switching to the brush from what he learned from processing. Which means eye of needle. And this is actually Tricia's print, and I guess she used letterpress to call it a print. It was derived, the glyph kof is derived from monkey and tail or needle, resembles a circle and a line. The sound is so abrupt, almost coarse, and to her it did not resemble a perfect circle or a line. And that's her print. Which means camel. But it's also the basis of C and G. Those were the same at one point. The sound value in the original Phoenician, it's derived from that plosive. It's considered a voiced velar plosive, the gh. And so I started to experiment with geometric lines to represent sort of a logical understanding, and then to add a single expressive stroke representing the expression of sound, and then translating the concept of voiced velar plosive with actual gunpowder and explosion into the final print. And then in 2014, we were awarded a grant from the Center for Craft, Creativity, and Design, who are awesome, to explore digital fabrication techniques as part of creative processes. And we were to use workshopping as a generative or as a research tool to learn about things like CNC routers and how they could be part of an artistic process, again, as a generative tool. So one manifestation of this, which is very much sort of a departure, but it's in the same sort of mindset, were these little drawing robots that I made. They're all based on this thing called the Arduino, which is a very small computer, and some code, which allows basic control of those robots. Then it was all a series of commands. So the idea is, how can you make letter forms or other things translated through this sort of code system to look at how letter forms could be constructed. That's what the robot would look like. Again, it's a drawing tool. And then to sort of design letter forms and whatnot through mathematic processes, all translated, again, translating through the technology to sort of see what it can add or detract. So here's the drawbot. So it's making an ampersand. You see? We also reconsider the letterpress and wood type, but this time in the context of modularity, or the idea of modular, sort of small discrete chunks, parts of processes as input and output mechanisms. Because we were really interested again in like looking at how letters could be constructed as like code as individual modules, a program as a module, a paintbrush as a module, a CNC router as a module. One little thing, one part of a process that you feed an input, you get an output, and then you respond to the output as another input to another process. Removing the sort of intention that is usually there with design thinking, and more allowing things, you know, for haphazards and sort of chance operations to happen. So we did a workshop down at Virginia Commonwealth University, which was a 3-day workshop where we brought the router down again. And we started working with students there to conceive of a new modular typeface, the idea of creating individual modules that could be added together to create letters and then therefore sort of affect language. And so we began with pencil and paper, which is always the right place to start. And then using the crit wall, we collaboratively discussed the different systems that people came up with, and then we all arrived at actually 2 systems that we were going to cut on the CNC. So just showing more of the sort of process work, how forms can come together. And then using tracing paper to work out these different modules, which is so much faster than a computer, as hopefully you all know. Doing things by hand is a lot faster sometimes. And then also graph paper and cutting them out, moving them around, seeing how they were going to work. So yeah, more of the sort of process, and then going and digitizing these into the computer through Adobe Illustrator, recreating those modules once they'd been worked out as actual cuttable paths. And so the again, you can see that this is our setup with the router, and we were actually outside on the sun deck, which was kind of fun because our router is really loud, not like the one you have here. And then the software, in case you are interested, was Cut2D and Mach 3 in order to create the toolpaths and then to cut the router or cut the blocks themselves. It's an example of the router cutting one of the blocks. Yes, the bit needs to change because it's dull. So there's one of the modules finally cut, and then laid out on the letterpress to create letters. Here you can see the R of one system and the Q of another. You can see the W. And then just purely experimenting, having the students just didn't really, we printed a couple of type specs, but they mostly just wanted to sort of play with the forms. And we realized that that's just as important as well as another sort of, as the thought process, that we may have an intention, but we really are more interested in what the students were going to do and how they were going to sort of translate this themselves. So then last summer, we were invited down to Penland to expand this workshop over 2.5 weeks, which was like, wow, 2.5 weeks, all right. So what that meant is that we could allow the students to iterate more, and we could allow them to come up with ideas, and then we could cut the blocks, and then they could print the blocks, and then they could learn how that, and let that sort of fold back into their process. Again, all of this being very process-based, and again, having the CNC just as one part of that. Same type of thing, paper, pencil, pens. And some modules, this is some modules of one of the systems that they created. We also limited it to a 2 3/4 inch block, which was actually a really nice limitation, because if you got to have some kind of parameters in order to push against, which is part of the creative process. And then some more playful effects. They explored different textures and patterns that they could create with the CNC, sort of offsetting or juxtaposing with the wood grain. Different halftone dots and other abstractions. And also just having some fun. Incorporating their drawing or their own illustration into it. So then the most successful of this system involved the overlap of 2 colors to create one letter, and using all within the single block. So this student was working out their system on the computer, which was also really interesting to sort of start with sketch and trace, and then go to the computer, and then go, then create those toolpaths on the computer, cut them, and then see how they print, and then go back and adjust. And so she ended up creating this whole system based off of the circle with single lines cut into it. And so she ended up making the whole alphabet. So this is A, B, and C. D, E, F, G. Some of you in the workshop saw some of these blocks, and now you know how they were supposed to be printed. H, I, J, K. L, M, N, O. P, Q, R, S. T, U, V, W. X, Y, and Z. So you can also see that we're very interested in not sort of forcing the students to work with typography, but again, using typography as a frame to explore other types of visual form and other types of visual form languages. Which brings us up to this workshop. This was when Tricia and I arrived here in Milwaukee on Tuesday. We knew that we wanted to cut a new system, a new modular system. We also knew that we didn't want to know what it was until we got here. Sort of forcing ourselves to, forcing the creative process to happen. And so what we did was, this was the ultimate system that was created, but what we did was we first went up to Hamilton Wood Type, which if you've never been up there, in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, straight about an hour and a half north, you should go up there. They're one of the original manufacturers of wood type. And what we found in amongst the giant warehouse of wood type were these things called splits. They were these pieces, because what would happen is that when they would manufacture wood type, sometimes they would not be able to, if they wanted to do a big letter, they wouldn't have a piece of wood big enough, so they would actually do half the letter on one block and half the letter on the other, and they called them splits. And where the actual split happened was just based on the size of wood that they had. It wasn't intended. It wasn't like, oh, well, we should split it here. It was like, well, this is where it has to split because that's the size of the wood we have, which was really fascinating and enjoyable for us. And so what we found was that when we started putting these together on the floor of the museum, we started seeing them as modules. We started seeing parts of letters as modules, and where new letters and new language and new meaning was coming out. And it was really sort of entwined with that pure sort of visual form fun. And then what would happen if you would take a letter like the N and then just flip half of it? Is that a W, or is it purely an expressive sort of form? And so from this, you can see that this was the face that we designed called Splits from our experience at Hamilton. And for example, you can see how the M here is created with those diagonal forms, which is reminiscent of the left side of the other form over there. The top portion, which is sort of the upside down U, is very reminiscent of the parts of the C, those simple curves. So those of you in the workshop, does it make more sense now? So what would happen is this is also considered a chromatic face, which means it's based on color, it's reliant on color. And so each letter is reliant on having two colors to construct it. You can also see these are the modules and the number of modules that you need in order to make the whole alphabet in a single uppercase. So that's what they looked like on the bed of the press just yesterday, and what the letters look like actually printed. So there you have W, X, Y, and Z. And I'm realizing that I don't think I'm using all of my time, but that's what I got for today. Thank you.